The name of the movie is Arctic. The film begins with Overgaard stranded in the North Pole after his many plane crashes. He digs deep and clears snow until he reaches the ground. After turning off the alarm clock, he assesses his progress before heading to the shelter. He must have drilled it for the word SOS. It means asking for aid took him a long time. He returned his tools to the plane and went to check some holes he made in the snow for fishing. And after he pulled the string, he was able to get the fish, and after looking at it with gratitude, he placed it next to the fish he had caught previously and put it in a blue box, and chose another frozen fish to eat. He returned to the plane and deftly cut the fish into small pieces. He ate it sitting in complete solitude. Having rested, he took the distress beacon and his manual dynamo and headed again outside, and as there was no response to his signal, he sat a little contemplating the harsh and unforgiving landscape. Then he returned to his shelter. After he removed the socks from his frozen feet, he prepared to rest and got into his sleeping bag. Upon waking up, as part of his daily ritual, he went to a stone mound he had built as a memorial and named it Karen. He carefully removed the freshly fallen snow on the mound and said, "See you tomorrow." Leaving the place, he continued to work and began digging to get out the rock that was blocking his plan. Finally, he managed to get it out, after which he rested for a while it was snowing. When he came back to check if he had caught anything that day, he found his blue container broken with large claw marks next to it. He carefully scanned the area and returned to his shelter, then closed the door behind him. He sat up and was in a state of shock and was exhausted by the difficulty of what he was living. After a short time, he returned to his routine and took the distress beacon again to the hill to search for the signal, but failed again, and he stopped the alarm clock again. On the way back, he saw a polar bear walking in silence and solitude. The next morning, he returned to Karen Rock and cleared the snow again, then continued digging. After that, he took a fish out of the box and then went to try to search for the signal again, and suddenly, when he was about to give up, a green light appeared on the distress beacon unexpectedly. He ran to get the distress flare and waved it at the helicopter in order to save him. He felt relieved when he saw the helicopter, but his joy quickly turned into sadness when the helicopter was unable to land because of the strong winds. The helicopter soon fell due to the wind. He ran towards it to search for survivors. He pulled the pilot who died in the accident and tried to reach the young woman who was seriously injured and lost consciousness. After he removed the seatbelt, examined her injury and searched for the location of the medical equipment before it got dark. The next morning, after making sure she was alive, he gently wrapped a scarf around her neck. He found in the helicopter a map and a bag of dry noodles. He ate it greedily, and after removing the helicopter door, he carefully tied up the girl and told her he was taking her to his shelter, then wrote that 2 people were alive and wrote their location on the helicopter before dragging her away. He grabbed her and put her in his place so she could rest. Then he examined her injury and searched for her identity, then gave her some water. He grabbed her hand and asked her to squeeze his hand if she could hear him, and he told her afterwards with compassion that the helicopter pilot had died, and he told her to try to stay awake. He left a note for her to read when she could get up. Respectfully, he built a monument over the pilot's grave, then took some things from the helicopter and put a picture in his pocket, then laughed sarcastically and said, "Are you serious?" after he found a sled in the helicopter. He took the sleigh to his sanctuary. When he came back, he put the girl's family picture in the window so she could see it. He lit the gas tube he had taken from the helicopter to warm his hands. After carefully locating it on the map, he located a seasonal station, but the place was too far away. After that, he went to the place where he is fishing, and overjoyed that he managed to catch a big salmon, he cooked it and added to it the spaghetti that he took from the helicopter. And he eats with pleasure. He started feeding the girl and reassuring her by saying that people were looking for her. He sat next to the girl and put his hand in her hand, which kept pressing him weakly. Because of her deteriorating condition, he made the difficult decision to leave the shelter and head to the seasonal station. He collected the supplies he would need for the trip. He puts the girl in the sled. After, he leaves a note of their identities and destination. He started the arduous journey after examining his direction and standing worriedly looking at the vast mountain hills in front of him, and after reassuring the injured girl that they were fine and would reach their destination safely, he continued to advance. He stopped for the night and dug out a snow cave to take refuge in. Then he fed the girl and urged her to stay awake. The next morning, he continued until he reached the red flag. He cleared the snow to reveal the chest. He took a rest and began to meditate. He marked on the map before opening the box containing the rope and ID and then put it in his pocket. He reached the steep rocky hills. It is not indicated on the map. He calculated the distance in despair, only to discover that the alternative route was too long and on the windy side. He decided to climb to the top to see the way. He discovered a relatively smooth path in front of him. Then he got down and pulled the girl slowly and carefully. But the rope slipped from his grip and he tried again, and he used all his strength, but the rope slipped again. The third time he lost his balance and almost fell, and he accepted defeat. And although he was completely exhausted mentally and physically, he ignited the desire to survive and looked down the slope. He said, "We'll take a better route. The longer route will add at least 3 days to their journey." He kept pulling the sled behind him before finding a cave to rest at night. The girl was unresponsive when he tried to feed her and give her some water, but he told her she should try, and he continued to look after her. The polar bear was attracted by the smell of fish, so the polar bear tried to enter the cave, but Overguard used his distress flare and managed to drive him away. The next morning he struggled to pull the sled because of the blizzard. He stopped the sleigh to act as a barrier to protect them from the icy winds. He rested a bit next to the unconscious girl in a sleeping bag. When he awoke, he pulled out the sled and took off his gloves to check for the excruciating frostbite on his hand. He continued to pull the sled behind him, and when he stopped and asked her to squeeze his hand, she did not respond, so he closed her sleeping bag and sat beside her with the fire on. After examining the girl's wound, he gently placed her picture in her unresponsive hand. He noticed the blood coming out of her mouth. He decided to continue the journey alone. He pulled the sleigh loaded with his things and stopped when he saw flowers had grown among the stones. As he continued walking a little further, he fell into a crevasse and later awoke to find himself at the bottom of a cave with one of his feet trapped under the rock. Although he did his best to free himself, he was doing more damage to his leg. He lay down again in the snow after his efforts and slowly came to terms with the desperate and dangerous situation he was in, but at last he managed to free his wounded leg and slowly crawled back to the girl and checked if she was still alive. When he found her alive, he felt guilty for leaving her alone and started crying, apologizing for leaving her. Despite his injury, he pushed the sled forward after he stuffed a deep open wound in his leg with snow and put a cloth on it to stop the bleeding. He followed his lead as he struggled and pulled the sled behind him. Suddenly the girl started coughing. He stopped to give her some water and then kept going, but the sled was heavy. He had to remove some items from the sled to lose weight, and he was exhausted due to physical exertion and lack of food. He crawled very slowly down an icy slope so he could see a helicopter descending near them. He slid down the slope back into the sled. He pushes the girl off the cliff, and after he reaches, he tries to get the helicopter crew's attention. He knelt down and lit the last torch he had with his injured hands, but the crew couldn't see him. After that, he removed his red jacket and lit it in an attempt to attract the helicopter crew's attention. After that, he grabbed the girl after he lost hope of survival, and he put her on the snow, then lay down next to her while holding her hand, and suddenly the helicopter landed and rescued them. Here the movie ends. Thank you for watching.